Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. This episode of the Savage Worlds GM podcast is brought to you by Software Luxury Mattress, the only online mattress company that provides free delivery, setup, and mattress removal. Also, follow us on Twitter at SWGM Podcast, on Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Tune into the YouTube channel. I'm sorry, I'm having a laugh attack because of the looks on the other host's face from the promo. Check out the Savage Worlds GM Podcast YouTube channel / Savage Worlds GM Podcast. If you like what we do, want to get behind the show, throw us a buck on Patreon, patreon.com / SWGM Podcast. And last but certainly not least, on iTunes at Savage Worlds GM Podcast. If you're watching the live stream of the show, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring that into the show. Tonight's topic, free-for-all. We're having another free-for-all smorgasbord topic, kind of free form, and here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
So throw us a buck on Patreon, because apparently we can't even get through an intro right, much less an ad read.
That's part of the attraction of the show. Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Wait, did we get a real sponsor? Can I stop stripping now?
No, I'll explain in a moment. I'm a fan of Tom Segura and his wife Christina Paginski, and they have a podcast called Your Mom's House, and every one of their Mom's House episodes starts with a Satva luxury mattress commercial. So I'm just paying homage. So we'll go ahead and start talking.
Jared,
tonight. Yeah,
you hear me? Know what I mean? Know
yeah,
what I'm
I know. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what's up.
Give him the grease.
I'm just glassing, man. I'm just over here glassing.
All right, so Jared and I can stop our this old house, your mom's house inside jokes now. Everybody's like, what? Everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, we might get McDonald's to build us a studio. I'm not sure if we're
watching too much of Something's Burning with Bert, where it's Bert Kreischer cooking shirtless with those same guys in his kitchen.
It's good stuff. Good stuff.
I gotta say, if we keep talking about this, they are actually going to have to pay us at some point.
I don't think we're anywhere.
It is a free for all,
Right?
Oh, gee, what the hell was that?
Oh, it's going to be a great episode.
It's one of those weeks, so it's going to be one of those nights.
Yeah, people better start asking questions.
Yeah, we've just kind of gone loopy. So if anybody wants to understand what's going on, we've kind of already hit like a stress point, and we kind of got a little squirrely. So, so they're the inmates are running the asylum tonight, so to speak. So
we have a real question.
Since we don't have a topic, I wanted to kind of start the show by looking at Dustin and going, so why didn't you argue more strenuously for your baby on the other podcast, man?
Now this other pod, I'm gonna exclude myself from this conversation. That's not the right word, but when jurisprudence takes over, and the judge says I'm going to recuse myself.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so I'm just
because I've not yet heard said broadcast.
Oh, you haven't heard the new Wild Dog.
No. Oh, now I know why you're in such a good mood.
I mean, the gauntlet was definitely thrown down. Jared was supposed to be on a plane to England tonight, apparently.
I was kind of expecting, you to be missing and police to be looking for you.
For those who don't know, Dustin did a guest spot on the Wild Die podcast where they talked a lot about virtual tabletop. And Dustin was kind of given the role of being the one guy on there to talk about and defend the honor of Roll20, while he kind of got dogpiled by three people who were more talking about Fantasy Grounds and Tabletop Simulator.
To be fair, I feel like that there were some good points made, and Eric really helped balance it out because.
To sum it up.
Well, I was going to say, Eric takes a bit of a back seat there and doesn't put a lot of his opinion into the conversation unless something really needs to be pointed out, kind of as a good show host. I know some of Eric's kind of behind the scenes actual opinions because I've worked very closely with him when I was doing development for Fantasy Ground stuff. So I know some of his opinions, and he didn't air most of that. He just kind of talked about some factual stuff to give you guys other talking points to kind of back and forth. So, Eric does a really great job of running that show and kind of keeping the, unlike over here where the inmates run the asylum, over there the asylum actually runs the inmates.
Yeah. Also, like, Harrison really did take a good stance on Roll20, but I think he did that just to drive Gary nuts. Mission accomplished.
Well, and to be fair, from my understanding, Harrison has more experience with Roll20 as a GM, and like no experience with Fantasy Grounds as a GM. At least that's my understanding. I believe Harrison only has like a demo copy and runs only as a player over there.
They talked about that, and yeah, he said that's the way it was. One of the big debates that we came into on that episode was how Fantasy Grounds is set up to be automatic for you. And I feel like I didn't get to that point, but I feel like that's kind of a limiting factor. One of the selling points for Roll20 for me is the fact that I can exert a lot more control because everything isn't automated. Being able to control the tone and the feel and the art, it definitely appeals to me much more so.
Well, you also, and here's the thing too with Roll20, and I'll jump in on this conversation as part of Roll20. With Roll20, it's more open source software as a concept and feel. So it allows you as a GM, if you want to have macros set, you can define and you can customize those macros for dice rolls. There's a lot you can do with automation in Roll20. Then this is something that Dave and I both looked at when we were doing this, the Savage Saturday Night series, where at one point I had a macro button for everything. Here's a notice macro button. Here's a blah blah macro button, and we went away from that and went, no, here's a standard trait button. You're gonna make a trait test.
We talked about that either last week or the week before. That we had moved away from because it was becoming Savage Worlds the video game rather than being a virtual table from which we could play Savage Worlds the same way we would around a table with our friends. Right. And I think that's the part of it that, to a certain extent, Gary doesn't see, because my understanding is Gary actually takes like a TV to the local game store and uses it as a replacement tabletop so he can display the maps and do all the automation that Fantasy Grounds does, even when he's playing in a face-to-face game. He's not using it the way like we would use it, where we're playing with people all over the globe and you can't have that face-to-face experience. And personally, I've said this a few times, I honestly do feel like we could just as easily run our Friday night game without Roll20 at all. Just having everybody roll the dice on their own desk or table in front of them and read off what their roll was to the GM, just using audio, because we don't use a lot of the other stuff. We do some image hosting and stuff like that, but because we play so theater of the mind, really we just need a good voice over IP program and we could play the game. Yeah. And we've done it here on the show where we've done it with either Fantasy Grounds or Roll20 as show material, where I really felt like we only used Fantasy Grounds or Roll20, so there was images to display to the people who are watching the thing on YouTube. You could listen to any of our actual plays as a podcast and get just as much out of them without needing that visual cue.
That's true too. And the thing to remember about Roll20 is not a Savage Worlds desktop simulator. That's not what it's intended to be. It's intended to be a virtual tabletop. If you want to play a game of poker on it, you can. If you want to play dominoes on it, you can. You want to play checkers, you can. And it has that open source approach to that. And the main problem I have with Roll20 at this point is the momentum and for development on it has slowed way down.
I think it all D&D. They actually have some licensing to have material on their store for D&D. They don't have that licensing in place for other systems. So there's just, it's kind of petered out. Now, I actually approached Roll20, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, with a pitch to do the same thing for them that I did for Fantasy Grounds, which is, I'm working on this project to bring the one of the oldest Savage Worlds products, Pirates of the Spanish Main, out digitally to people. I didn't want any credit as far as that was concerned. I still wanted all the credit to go to the folks that actually wrote the stuff, but I wanted to make it available in a digital format. And while Fantasy Grounds jumped on that opportunity to bring about, more content for people to play, Roll20 never even responded to the email I sent, despite the fact that I told them that I had the licensee approval from PEG as a licensee and would get the additional approval necessary to bring that product to Roll20. I told them I would do all the work to get it done, and they still didn't even get back to me. So Roll20 has, and as I understand it, I'm not the only one who's had that experience. Roll20 just isn't really jumping on it because there's not a lot of money in it for them because they're not being paid to host it. Whereas with D&D, they actually got a payment to bring that to their platform.
Right. And Roll20 is really a kind of it was all a Kickstarted project, and that kind of project has ended. I mean, there's just not a lot of support for it. There's not a lot. You won't see a lot of marketing for it like you did early on in the day. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to some of the questions.
Yeah. I don't even know how to pronounce Eric's name, so I'm just going to call him Eric.
Hold on. I've got this. If you're playing the at-home game, make sure you have the Jared mispronounces somebody's name spot ready to go. But and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Eric.
This is his first show he's watching. So.
I understand. So that's why I gave the preamble that I
so you're popping his cherry in real
probably going to be really fucked up.
So here we go. Eric Hayim Ezel. That's how we'll call him Eric. States, I'd love to hear you guys talk about the last parsec. How you feel about the free knowledge skill being equal to smarts, and how that incentivizes smarts, and your thoughts on the setting in general.
So I don't want to get too lost in the specific weeds with last parsec's mechanics, because I think we're all aware of the fact that's all getting ready to change since last parsec came out and then Suede was released.
Yep.
I think what you're going to see is that last parsec is going to rely a little more heavily on things like the common knowledge skill. It's going to rely a little more heavily on some of those defined knowledge skills that don't say knowledge in their name anymore. They just say battle or hacking or things like that. I think that's the direction last parsec's going to lean once we get an updated conversion for that setting. So I don't want to get too lost in the weeds there, but what I will say is this. Last parsec failed to grab me as a player because of the fact that when I looked at this Kickstarter, it was going to be, here's a full setting. And instead, what it ended up being, for me at least, was here's a set of plot point campaigns to be run with the sci-fi companion. And that wasn't what I thought I was getting into, because I then had to dig into a plot point campaign, which I notoriously don't run plot point campaign. But I had to dig into that to find any lore that I wanted to use to flesh out that world. I didn't get a full setting book that kind of gave me a sci-fi world to play in. The sci-fi companion is great. I don't mind that the setting rules and stuff come from that. But because they split it the way they did, I ended up feeling like I was just missing a GM's book for last parsec of this is kind of the setting book by itself.
Which I will say they ended up putting out.
Was that what Iron Gate was?
No, there is a last parsec core book.
Okay,
that they put out that basically, I don't remember if it was Dustin after the Kickstarter?
It came out after, I think, Betis Eris is when it after that is when it came out, because
Originally, it was intended to just be plot point campaigns, and they were loosely defined around the sci-fi companion. And a lot of people ran into this idea of, and I think I actually kind of fall a little bit on the dissenting side on this one, because I like the idea of the last parsec being sort of very loosely structured as this is jump core, and you very vaguely define it. But a lot of other people were like, well, what's going on in the rest of the universe? I want to do this, I want to do that. You know, you're right, Dave. It really wasn't a setting. It was kind of like
It's a sci-fi companion.
It was episodic. It was the lore of the entire universe is expanding out. I feel like they were doing the Star Trek thing where you're finding out more and more about what's happening as it goes along. But a lot of people just didn't like that. It didn't create the feeling that they wanted or that they needed.
Well, I'm going to say this. The Gen Con announcement for it misrepresented what it was.
Yeah.
Shane said, hey, we've got something coming out for sci-fi, and it's going to be a lot like the old TSR Star Frontiers.
Yeah.
It's inspired by Star Frontiers. An homage to Star Frontiers. That's not what we got. We did not get a setting book. We did not get a Deadlands Noir. We did not get a Deadlands Rome. Weird Wars Rome. We got the sci-fi companion and a plot point. That is not a setting book.
And here's the thing. It's not that what we received is bad.
No.
It's that what we received has no value to me as a player because I don't run plot point campaigns. The few times I've tried, it ends horrifically. I just don't do it well. I'm so much a dyed-in-the-wool sandbox GM, I just can't run those things. Mm-hmm. So when that's what they released is, here's like 4 plot point campaigns that you can run with the sci-fi companion. I'm like, yeah, but I can take the sci-fi companion and run anything I want. Why do I need your plot point campaigns? The setting book at least gives you some lore, gives you some races, gives you maybe a specific setting rule. There's stuff that comes in a setting book that I just didn't feel like I could get out of what the last parsec was offering.
I feel like
here's what I'll say about that, right? Imagine Pinnacle going, oh, we've got this great new super setting coming out. It's like releasing the Superpowers Companion 2nd edition when you were promised Unnecessary Evil.
Yeah.
An updated Unnecessary Evil. It's not the same thing. Those are not settings. It's just not the same thing. The sci-fi book is not a setting book. It's a companion.
I feel like each planet was meant to be its own setting. Like Betis Ares is a series of planets with like an interconnected theme. Leviathan is your dinosaur planet. It's like Terra Nova. Scientorium is like the library in space from Doctor Who. Each one is its own self-contained with the idea that different characters can travel between them.
So why isn't that in the last parsec book as one book, one main setting?
Because it would be huge. It would be very huge. It's literally, it's kind of like how you would get if they took it and they did it backwards, because
they wanted more digestible chunks.
Yeah. And you could stay in places.
To be fair, if they gave you tomorrow Deadlands for the very first time, and when they delivered it, they delivered Deadlands Reloaded, Deadlands Noir, Deadlands Hell on Earth, all at once as one book, it would be twice the size of Interface 0 2.0, and no one would play it.
Right. Here's my argument. Here's what I'm saying. And okay, fine. I'll admit that's true. Here's what I'm saying. When you announce we're going to release Deadlands to Savage Worlds, we're going to transition. It's the first time we've ever done Deadlands. Everybody knows about Deadlands. We're going to make Deadlands a published setting. And what you get is a bunch of rules for running an Old West game. with a bunch of free Savage adventures. That's not a setting.
And this is where I will say perhaps we should take the next question, because otherwise we're going to spend the next 45 minutes arguing whether or not we should shit on interface on what is obviously one of the better products that PEG has released recently, Last Parsec, because it's got so much traction. Like Rifts got a lot of traction, but it got traction with non-Savages who were brought to the system. Last Parsec got a lot of traction with dyed-in-the-wool Savages who wanted that. And I don't want to make it out like the four of us think it's a horrible product.
Oh, I don't think
it's quickly, I will say that Leviathan is one of the few plot point campaigns that I've actually run for a group and finished.
Yeah.
Because something always happens or we, we stop playing or we trade GMs and never get back to it. But I ran Leviathan from beginning to end for a group, and we had a pretty good time. I think I could have done a much better job running it. But yeah, so yeah, I think we can move on to the next question.
So I want to touch on one last thing that Eric asks here. He asked about my reference to Interface 0 2.0. No, I don't think Interface 0 2.0 is a good combination with the Sci-Fi Companion. They are very separate entities, and they don't cross-pollinate at all. And most of the people on this podcast or fans of this show will tell you that Interface 0 2.0 is impenetrable. It is too thick a book. They put too much in a single document, and it made it very non-digestible. And they've said that with 3.0, they're trimming a lot of the fat out. They're slimming that thing down. They're making it a little more approachable for people so that they can get in and run with it. And they're also changing up the way the gear is handled to be a little more phased towards some trappings, a little more phased towards reusing stuff so that you don't have, 30 pages of guns that you have to be able to go through to figure out what your character is carrying. They want to get away from a little bit of the equipment porn aspect that went with Cyberpunk.
That's actually Interface 0 illustrates what happens, what would have happened with the Last Parsec if they'd gone that route. Because here's what IZ does. It takes the entire world and the solar system, and people are overwhelmed because they have like a couple of pages. They tell you what's going on in each and every continent and pretty much almost every country and almost every, like the major cities. Like they try to cover the entire world, and it just overwhelms people. If you want to play Interface 0, you've got to pick a point. Like you have to say, okay, you're in the space colonies, or okay, you're in Pittsburgh, or okay, you're in New York. You can't go everywhere, and I think that's what overloads people.
Yeah, go with a vertical slice version of Interface 0.
Yeah.
You can have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
I just backed 3.0, the Kickstarter, today. You guys, I'll tell you what I think about it, because I know you're not going to get it.
Nope.
Hey, don't put it past me to back it, even if I don't plan to play.
I never even read all the stuff. Today or yesterday I was looking for something for Deadlands and going through all my Savage World stuff. I'm like, oh look, I have Interface 0 2.0. I never looked at it.
It's big, man. And in all honesty, I feel like it was trying to be a sci-fi companion in and of itself. Like it had so much to do that you could use either 2.0 or you could use a sci-fi companion. And to be honest with you, like I kind of got to this point where I almost decided to just use a sci-fi companion instead of IZ, but I am excited for 3.0.
Well, I'll say this about one final thing about Last Parsec. I do love the alien races. They're innovative. I do like the alien races. I like a lot of things about the Last Parsec. So moving on, let's take a look at another question. Dusty, you want to read the one from Sal? No, I mean Sal, because that looks like an L to me. My old eyes, not an eye.
Sigh.
The real question is, do you feel with the new licensing rules?
Sorry.
The real question is, do you feel with the new licensing rules that the Savage Worlds market / playground is getting a huge flood of new settings and content? Is it too much coming out at once?
So,
No, because I'm an addict. I need my settings. I need my games.
Well, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen a ton come out in the past couple weeks. Now there's a bunch of jump starts of stuff that's either already out there or was already planning on coming out, but I don't really think I've seen a flood of content.
The swag store has not been anywhere near as flooded as I expected it to be.
Yeah.
With that said, I think the big thing you're going to notice is that there's going to be a constant trickle coming in through swag that is going to be there no matter what. It's like the guy in Michigan who has to leave the faucet running in the bathroom to keep his pipes from freezing. You're going to have this constant drip. Every day there's going to be new stuff come out through swag at some point, once that marketplace really gets rolling. Most of it is going to be stuff you don't care about, and it is just going to run right down the drain for you. There's going to be people like myself or Dustin who are going to buy almost all of it just so that we have it in our toolbox to reach for if we need to borrow something. But you're going to also see that the licensees, the people who actually went through the whole vetting process to get their full license, are going to be releasing better content because of swag. Because all of a sudden, you can't skate by with low production value. You can't skate by with less art than the book really calls for. You can't skate by with a thinly veiled, kind of poor produced product, because you're now going to be competing in a marketplace that's going to be far more cutthroat than it's ever been before.
Mm-hmm.
More than
Very
that,
true.
we're going to see. I feel like we're going to start seeing people with we're going to start seeing a flood of talent. I feel like we're going to have people coming in and they're going to be releasing their products, and we're going to start seeing more of a volume and more of a sort of creative spark, because the fact of the matter is that when you're breaking into the market, you have to establish yourself. And this is an easier way for people to go out and establish themselves and showcase that they have some talent.
So an example of this is going to be things like, if you look at Just Insert Imagination, there's a group of folks in the Nerds International group that were all friends with Eric. And when Eric joined Just Insert Imagination a few years ago, all of those people kind of had this extra door open to them that they could suddenly submit stuff to Eric that Just Insert Imagination would go on to consider publishing. And you started getting things like Punted and the Bounce from Harrison Hunt that ended up being a published product that Harrison didn't go out and get the license. He didn't go through the process to get that, but he produced something of a high enough quality that a licensee felt that they could do that. Chris, you guys did the exact same thing. You found an open door through a licensee. You gave a product that was of the quality necessary to be a licensed product, and you got it out there. And now all of a sudden, that gate that used to be find a licensee to sponsor you doesn't exist anymore. You can just throw it up on Drive-Thru-RPG, and it cuts out a lot of the, I don't want to say obstacle, but really it is. It's a big obstacle that's just been removed to let all that talent shine.
Right. I mean, because what that did for us is that made us be able to go and become an ace, to become a licensed publisher now. And it's going to allow us to hopefully get some of the Rocky Mountain Savages and some of the folks in our area who haven't been published a chance to get them published. And that's something that we're going to be shooting for as the Rocky Mountain Savages is getting these Denver folks who deserve to be published, getting them published.
Right.
I think one other thing that is going to be an offshoot of this is I fully expect, similar to what happened with Saga of the Goblin Horde from Richard Woolcock, I fully expect we are going to see at least one more system pop up as a direct competitor with Savage Worlds that comes from a Savage who starts to write up their thing for swag, realizes there's something Savage Worlds doesn't do, falls in the rabbit hole of creating a new mechanic, and goes way off the deep end and ends up creating something that's not Savage Worlds and ends up with a whole new system that they put out there because of this. Because what the swag thing did is it kind of opened the gates to that creativity, and someone is going to suddenly realize that they've got an idea they never even thought about doing anything with, that once they start producing is going to become something they didn't expect it to be. You're going to see like the D12 system that Richard came up with for Saga. You're going to see people come up with just whole new systems, and they're going to come from Savage Worlds players who want other things than what Savage Worlds does.
I don't have anything to add to that.
So I'm curious. I'm curious about Ruben's question.
All right, go ahead, read it off.
So it says, knowing Jared ran it, how do people overall feel about how Suede's versions of chases? So I'm guessing he just wants to know how you guys feel chases worked. I didn't see it. I still haven't managed to get a chase into one of my games. So I'm really curious to see how did the Suede chase rules run?
So unfortunately, I fell asleep when Jared was running that particular session. So I really don't have a lot to comment on there. I will say,
was that good?
Deep in it, the Wild Die podcast did an entire thing about their experience with it on the one that released today as well.
Yeah, I was a part of that actually.
So, if you're really interested in chases, after you're done listening to us, go listen to them, because you guys spent a good 20-25 minutes on just chases.
We did. We discussed the different versions that have been released, and the general consensus is that Eric runs them best out of everybody. My opinion is that personally, I like the idea of using mass battle in place of the rules that we have now. And we got into this discussion about how one of the versions of the most recently released chases was effectively mass battles reskinned for it. But Jared, you like it was for Dead End. Did you run like the latest version of the chase, or did you run the mass battles version?
I ran the 3.0 version of the chase when we ended up doing it.
Okay, because
I found the card mechanic fine. I don't see a problem at all with the card mechanic. We had a little bit of a false start because I didn't deal the cards face up. I dealt them face down. But I would say this: it's still a chase. Here's the thing: if you're expecting the old chase, the new chase rules to somehow magically be a 180-degree turn from chases from Savage Worlds Deluxe, you're in for a surprise. You're in for a letdown. Having the cards on the table is nice because it does give some perception of linear distance. It helps you.
Yeah, it gives you the visual.
Yeah, it kind of gives you a visual. It's also good to kind of help you if you're using ranged weapon attacks with it. All you got to do is count the number of cards as a weapon increment range. That's nice. I like the ability in the rules that we ran them for you to basically do a maneuver that pushes you further ahead or lets you fall further back. It's just a simple driving roll at the end of everybody's turn. I mean, there's a lot of nice things in it, but it's really not much different than the general force maneuver, which is the opposed driving agility trick or distraction trick from the chase rules in Deluxe. I mean, the chase rules aren't horrible. I'll just put it this way: they're not horrible.
I do want to point out that using a test of will in a chase wasn't ever officially in Deluxe. It was something almost everyone did and was discussed even with Clint on the forums, and I think is where the birth of those things came from. But if you actually go back and reread the Deluxe chase rules,
it's
nowhere in there does it actually say you can do a test of wills. It gives you a forced maneuver, but it does not let you do a test of wills.
Well, it's essentially the same mechanic, though, Dave. The force maneuver,
but it can only be done by the driver. Like, passenger can do it.
True.
Like the new force maneuver and some of the new stuff they've added
allows you to use tests and support and stuff.
Exactly. It allows you to do a lot of stuff that most of us were already doing, but was never officially part of the chase rules before. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing about the new chase rules, is really it just kind of looks at what a lot of people were already doing and adds a lot of that to what is currently out there.
I feel like the fact that I can help people who are driving, even though I don't have the driving skill, helped me and the rest of the party out a lot, because my player has a very high persuasion. So I was able to sort of bolster the driver's morale or provide them with support in certain ways. And common knowledge is definitely helpful if you're trying to get away. You can give directions or whatever. But there have been situations where I've been in games before where it was, okay, the person who is driving is the only one that does anything at all, and the rest of us are just sort of like hanging on. Yeah. So being able to like scream, turn here, and roll common knowledge to make sure it's the right path helps out a lot. Or you can do this, you got this, and sort of like bringing them down so that they can sort of focus a bit.
Well, the thing that makes that possible and Swade, and it seems like this, support and all this. Listen, it's just a cooperative role that no longer requires you to have the same skill. It's the same mechanic. It's just a cooperative role that no longer requires you to have the same skill.
And that's it, because like we had so much in terms of specialization, it doesn't make any sense that the guy who's supposed to do all the talking is driving while the driver sits next to him. But it does make a lot of sense that the guy that can do the talking is sitting next to the driver.
Even if you have the same skill, you can have the driver driving an RV who is not the owner of that RV, and the owner with the driving skill going, no, you can't go so heavy on the clutch, and making a driving roll to instruct him how to use that vehicle. I mean, and here's the thing with Swade, it is more wide open than Deluxe ever was.
I'm seeing a lot of people say the new chase rules are less abstract, and I actually completely disagree. I think they're more abstract, and people just have a better understanding of it now. Because here's the thing, you can use any skill you want and narrate it however you want. Less abstract would mean it would say, if using persuasion, here's the maneuver you can use. Instead, it says, make this shit up as you want as you go along. No rules. And people are embracing that freedom, but don't realize that it's an added layer of abstraction that's been added.
Well,
giving them that freedom.
I think what some people talk about, and Dr. Boson says this in his last sentence about, it just says, instead of having an arbitrary long range imposed just because. And that was a thing in the old rules that would always throw people, is okay, one round I'm at short range, next round I'm at long range. And it was just kind of weird and arbitrary. I mean, that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
And now you have those cards saying that each card is
a range
X range increment. And you know exactly where you are based off of those cards, and you can add and remove from either end. So yeah, I think there's abstraction in the skills and things like that, but I think in like the ranges and things, it helps clear some of that up.
The quote-unquote location you are within the chase is less abstract, but everything else is more abstract. And I think really what people are celebrating isn't the lack of abstraction. It's the lack of that arbitrary sudden flip. You don't have you don't have a card draw that takes you from short range to long range. Instead, you've got these different maneuvers that can maneuver you closer or further away.
Right.
And I think that's what it is it's less the abstraction difference and more the lack of it's suddenly not as swingy as it used to be.
Correct.
You're located in the chase.
Right. So let's continue with Sai's other question. While running a battle sequence, do you try to add dialogue between the rounds to keep it interesting? I personally do.
I add not even between rounds, like between actions.
Yeah.
The big bad will take a cut and then he'll offer an insult that's not part of the mechanic. I'm not having him do a taunt, but I'm absolutely in his voice taunting the player characters.
I'll give you a great example. In a recent Dead End game, the NPC, one of the player characters, was found alone and got basically into a knife fight. We're struggling over a knife that the player character had. And the NPC started off all sweet as pie, trying to persuade her and smooze her. Then his true nature came out, and he's like, "What are you going to do about it, you little bitch? You're a little teenage little girl. You're not going to beat a grown man." And that wasn't a taunt; it was just an in character thing for that character. And the great thing is, it also inspires the player to give you good dialogue back, because the player then responded, "I may be a Georgia peach, but I ain't yours for the picking." Great line. Absolutely, it adds to the scene. I think a lot of times this hobby we tend to do the D&D approach. I swing, do I hit? I hit, do I swing? Do I hit? Do I hit? And that's just, if you're running combat completely technical and completely not as a movie scene or a sequence like it deserves, then you don't end up adding dialogue. I would end up adding dialogue and description to what happens.
Yeah, and I need to work more on that. But I think sometimes people get hung up with, and I know I have as a player and as a GM, okay, it's a 6-second round, and then you have these two people who want to have this dialogue for 5 minutes, and you're thinking, wait, you can't do all that in 6 seconds, but just kind of let that go and let that dialogue flow a little bit, and then move on to the next person in the round, because this is all happening simultaneously. So you kind of take those two kind of out of the picture for a second. They're having their 2-minute conversation back and forth and jabbing each other and bickering, and it's not a mechanic, it's just what they're doing. And then just move on to that next person, and all that is happening all at the same time. But it's that round, it's that 6-second round, I think, that sometimes kind of gets people to go, and you have a lot of people who always say, well, can I say something? Well, yeah, you could say one sentence in your round, and I need to get out of that too.
So I want to take this down the rabbit hole for a minute, fellas, because this is one of those conversations that I think our hobby needs to have. And that is, we are on the cusp of watching something happen in gaming as a whole, not just our hobby, but gaming as a whole, that is going to change everything. And what that is we are actually starting to see college courses that are professors doing study and theoretical work about games, about how to turn a story into a game, about how to take a mechanic and turn it into a game, how to do these things and break down the idea of gaming into a theoretical study. And what's going to happen when that actually breaks through and we have a full generation of, I hate to say it, but like professional game researchers out there, is we're going to have so much additional stuff that is going to change the way we approach gaming, where you're going to be able to take a course in how to be a better game master that's not just listening to 4 guys rant on a podcast. It's going to be actual, like, this has been scientifically studied. It's been tested across thousands upon thousands of groups, and we know that this actually leads to better behaviors at the table. And that is going to be such an interesting thing that people have pushed against that you don't want to be told the better way to run your game. You don't want to be told about the better version of fun, but in all reality, there is going to come a moment where there is a quantifiable better way to do something that we've been able to determine, and that is on the horizon. It may not happen next year, but it's coming, and it's going to make things like, well, how do you weave story into a combat round? Well, maybe they're going to break it down and say, combat rounds aren't 6 seconds, they're a minute long. They're 5 minutes long. The abstraction for that dice roll is several minutes of swordplay that culminates in a, oh, wow, you just did all this damage to that person, and now they've got a reason to back completely out of the fight. Because that one dice roll, as we all know in Savage Worlds, one dice roll can kill your character.
Yep. Well, I think, and I saw the quote or mention here in the chat as well. I agree. Describing actions is just as powerful as dialogue. If if a character takes a injury, one eye hindrance, and they're in a knife fight, then use the GM or the player to describe, oh yeah, I swing wildly and it cuts across his eye in a diagonal. There's blood going everywhere. He puts his hand up and shouts, "Oh, you bitch!" His blood pours through his fingers. It's all part of that description, and the dialogue is all part of role play.
Right. Well,
above and beyond the dice roll.
To be fair, like, psychology has been doing this for a long time. It's just they didn't know they were doing it. There's a form of therapy called psychodrama and role play, and what it is you go through imagined scenarios in order to come up with a method of coping, because the unconscious mind is much better with developing a framework with how to cope with or to deal with an anxiety or a phobia-inducing situation much better in an imagined scenario than in a real one. Because if you panic in an imagined scenario, you can just shut it down. But in the real world, you flip out. So psychology has been doing this for decades. If you even go back to psychoanalytics, literally it's a role-playing game where you go through imaginary scenarios or what you believe happened to cause you to hold on to this unconscious belief.
So Art Fernandez brings up the idea that it used to be the roll to hit was that one good attack that slipped through the defenses every minute. And he's not wrong. If you roll the clock back in time to the late 70s, there was actually a discussion where they said anything shorter than a 1 minute round is too close to trying to be simulationist and will just get in the way of the fun of the game. And as we've pushed that envelope now down to where we measure it in 6 second rounds, we do get exactly what Chris is talking about, where it's the whole pushback on, well, you can't do that. You couldn't accomplish that in 6 seconds. The fuck do I care? The fun of the game is in being able to describe my character doing this awesome combination. I don't care if I can accomplish it in 6 seconds, 60 seconds, or 600 seconds. That's what I want my character to do.
Yeah. So I have a quick question. So, Jared, you were just talking about, and this brought up a point that I think is important. You were talking about describing actions, and the action you described is, okay, I slice him across the face, and the blood starts pouring out. So Savage Worlds has called shots.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do a called shot, you're assumed everything to hit center mass. So it is that person saying, I hit him across the face, and the blood is now flowing, who didn't do a called shot. Are you going to say, nope, you didn't do a called shot? How in Savage Worlds do you handle that?
Here's what I'm going to say this. All right. Okay. So the system we're using is different. So I'm not going to reveal what that system is because it's proprietary information.
Okay, but let's talk Suede, though.
However, we're talking Suede. We're talking Suede. Let's say you're running the gritty damage setting rule from Suede. And every time you take 2 wounds, you roll on the injury table and resolve and find out what happens. That's a situation where, one eye hindrance. Okay, now I've got to explain how this wound resulted in the one eye hindrance. Well, he got too close. You reached out and it cut a trench across his eye. He's bleeding. That's why he now has the one eye hindrance, because that eye is completely obscured by blood pouring over it.
But I think more what I'm saying is as a player, because I run into this a lot. The players are like, well, I'm gonna hit him and hit him in the face.
Okay.
Well, are you doing a called shot? Well, no, I just want to hit him in the face. I don't want
that -6.
I just want to hit him in the face. So, or if you say to that character, like we've said before, I say to you, Jared, what did that hit look like? Well, I swung out and I hit him in the face and I cut him across the face. But you didn't do a called shot, so did you? That's kind of what I'm going at. If I'm using core rules, I'm not using gritty damage. I have called shots. What are you doing? What are you going to do for that person who is wanting to do all this stuff, and then you're taking them out of that?
First of all, you need to not determine the outcome before you make the roll. So there's a difference between I want to drag my knife across his left eye and I drag my knife across his left eye and make a fighting roll. There's a difference between those two things. That's where the mechanic comes into play. When the player character says, I want to try to punch him in the face. Here's what I'm going to bring down to this as well, too, because some of this relies on fair and equitable abdication of the rules, right? So you as a GM have what's called fiat. You have veto power to say and set a precedent. So if we're within talking distance of each other and you say, I punch him in the face, give me a fighting roll. It's why? Because it's right there. Do I need to make a called shot to the head? Hell no. You punch him in the face by making a standard fighting roll because you're standing within inches of that guy. If you're trying to shoot an arrow into his eye at 100 yards, well, we're having a different conversation about mechanics.
So I'm going to go a slightly different path with this and say it's already in the rules. It is the GM's discretion to interpret the dice rolls. While yes, the rules say it's assumed if a called shot wasn't used that the general target is the chest. That's more so that you know what armor to apply, you know whether or not to have to roll on the injury table, things like that. Nothing says that I can't narrate that as being a cut to the arm, the leg, the face, a punch to the nose that sends blood spurting and causes him to cross his eyes. That's just shaken with a wound. Blood spurted and you crossed your eyes. You're shaken with a wound. But I didn't give you +4 damage for hitting him in the head because it's great to narrate that you punched him in the face, but you didn't actually ask for a called shot to his head for the benefit of a head shot.
There you go. I like that. And that's a good point. You can narrate all you want, but you don't get the benefits.
Yes.
If you don't do a cold shot. And right there, that to me, that's a great way to think about it.
And this goes back to something that Jib used to say on the show a lot, is that Savage Worlds doesn't care what it looks like. Savage Worlds just cares what's the mechanical effect it has on the game. The mechanical effect of an attack on the game is that it goes against your character's torso armor, it goes against your character's torso toughness, and it applies standard damage. It doesn't matter if I say that you kicked him in the ankle, you broke his arm, you punch him in the face. None of that matters because all of that is how we're having fun at the table instead of what the mechanics of the game say. And the mechanics of the game just say, you did X amount of damage.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you just kind of helped me and kind of made that little light come on to say, yeah, you can narrate any way you want it, but if you want that bonus or whatever, that the stuff that goes with the call shot, you got to say it's a call shot and you got to take the negative with the positive. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna throw this out there. What if you're making a shooting roll center mass and you get a raise, and the player wants to go, well, you know what? The more dramatic narrative of this is, I accidentally pulled a little too high on my shot and hit him in the head.
So
could you say, well, you know what? As a GM, you can say, well, you weren't intending to do that, but it fits the narrative of what's going on. +4 or roll a d6.
Here is where I come down on that. I would never allow a player to spend the first raise to do such a thing. And the reason for that is +4 is statistically bigger than a single +1d6 is going
right.
to be. Right. To be fair, +1d6 could be plus 32 points of damage because you ate all day long on that extra d6.
Right.
It could also be +1. And statistically, it's far more likely to be +1 through 3 than it is to be +4, 5, or 6. It just the way dice work, it sounds wrong for me to say that because it should be 50-50 that it's 1, 2, or 3 versus 4, 5, or 6, and it's just not. There's a reason dice kind of roll out the way they do, especially in Savage Worlds. So you have to take that step back and remember mechanically how much are you changing the game when you do that. Now, that said, put a setting rule in place that players get to choose what the benefit of a raise is. Let players, whether it's a called shot, a non-called shot, a ranged attack, or a melee attack, I don't care. You get 2 or 3 raises. I could draw up a little chart real quick as a setting rule that says you can spend 1 raise to make it a disarm or a knockback. You could spend 2 raises to give it the benefit of a specific called shot. You could spend 3 additional raises to add 2 AC D6s to the damage. I can come up with all day long. I can come up with stuff to add to that chart that players could spend extra raises on that the game currently doesn't care about. You get more than 1 raise on the attack roll. It just means you sat and did more disturbation and kept rolling when you had those aces.
Right, when you didn't need to.
I want to throw out an idea for you here. Like, let's say that you get a raise with enough so that they could make the headshot. Bennies allow for narrative changes. Can't you as a GM say, okay, narratively speaking, you have the option of throwing out a Benny so that the guy leans over and instead of taking its center mass, because you got enough, he accidentally zigged when he should have zagged, and now he gets the headshot by mistake.
So
here's the issue.
That question, and I would say it's in the core rules that a player can spend a Benny to take narrative control. I'm not going to take that away from the player, but at the same time, I'm not going to suggest it.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
and it's a small change.
And here's the other thing. Okay, so let's talk rules, right? Let's talk what Dave was talking about. If I hit you in the chest for my 2d6 weapon damage, and I get a raise, and I get an extra d6, and I hit you for 2 wounds in the chest versus 2 wounds in the head, what's the difference?
The difference is in a headshot. Well, I mean,
what's the difference by the rules? Mechanically, what's the mechanical difference? No, it's not, because it wasn't a called shot to the head.
All right, good point. I see what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. So So I think you're saying what Dave said.
Yeah, shaking in 2 wounds to the torso is exactly the same as shaking in 2 wounds to the head. So if it makes more narrative sense and fits better in the narrative of what's happening in the game, you hit him in the head.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is exactly kind of. I mean, that's not taking away from what Dave said. If they don't call the shot, they don't get the negatives or the benefits. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. They can narrate it however they want, and they just they don't get the stuff that goes with a called shot.
Yeah, one of my favorite called shots from Deluxe was the old -6 tiny target, like aim for the eye slit, because it didn't have a defined effect. It was make this extremely difficult shot and get an effect that you describe to the GM and agree on with them outside of combat that makes sense to both of you. This idea that I can make this called shot for an arrow into the eye slit of the knight's helmet, and it does a couple of things. One, it's an automatic headshot. I get the +4 damage. But two, it also bypasses all armor because I've shot through an opening in the armor. That extra benefit that you get to kind of negotiate with the GM is something that I think is, I don't want to say is missing from the current version, because the current version is still wide open to being able to do things like that. But the current version got a little too specific with some of the called shot things now, where you can make a called shot to the hand versus the arm, the face versus the head. And some of that just, to me, was a little superfluous. It was in answer to a lot of feedback they were getting. So I understand why PEG did it, and apparently someone out there felt it was necessary. But as a long-term Savage Worlds GM, I kind of was like, I don't need a separate modifier for a face versus a headshot. I'll just have that conversation with the player in the moment and come up with an appropriate penalty and bonus called shot that I can offer them. Because I know from the old days, I had that option at set a -8, and sure, you absolutely can shoot through the one missing scale on the dragon's hide and bypass all of its toughness and be shooting against a toughness 5 monster instead of a toughness 17. And wow, does that make a difference when the player actually achieves it?
Right.
But they had to overcome a -8.
Right. Well, here's what I'm saying. In actual gameplay too, Chris, right? 9 times out of 10, this is going to be what? Against an NPC? Against an extra?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter.
Who has 1 wound?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter.
So who gives a shit? If it makes a better story for, oh no, you pull the trigger, you blow his freaking head off because you do 1 wound. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. Yeah, especially if they're extras.
All right, we're up on the cusp. So, anything else in the chat? Any other burning questions?
Savage Ram asked an interesting one that I think bears some slight conversation.
Go ahead and read it off.
Hi guys, what are you expecting from the new fantasy companion?
No idea.
Wow, that's a loaded question.
I expect to have to wait.
Here's what I expect from the new companion. Pretty much what we got from the first round, just a little bit of touch up on paint. I don't think we're going to find anything incredibly new or amazing in a new fantasy companion. Other than I would like to. Here's what I would like to see them do. I would like to see them lean the way that the horror companion leans and talks about different flavors of fantasy instead of just assuming it's all Tolkien Western.
That would definitely be a lot better. I think you hit the nail on the head there with what I would like to see, Jared. I kind of hate to say that what I'm expecting is I feel like Suede covered everything that's going to be in everything that needs to be. But if we went in, like you said, like with the horror companion, if we went the whole route of theme and tone, and we went into the different genres of sort of like high fantasy versus dark fantasy, and maybe even
urban fantasy, or even urban fantasy.
Yeah, urban fantasy is like a genre that is like blowing up right now. We probably need to cover it. And even like Sandal and Sorcery, like, Beasts and Barbarians is pretty popular. It's kind of a fantasy setting. Even like horror fantasy would be a great addition. But
so, I guess where I'm going to have to disagree with both of you is, as much as I love what both of you have said, and those are absolutely what I would want.
They're going to be D&D transitioning products, right?
What I expect, which is what the question is, what are we expecting it to be? Mm. I expect it to be a almost direct comparison to what we see in the Superpowers 2.0 and the sci-fi companions. I expect to see a boatload of extra powers. I expect to see a whole new system of arcane backgrounds. I expect to see a whole new way of handling some of the magic item gear.
Yeah,
I expect to get a lot of rules that do a lot of stuff that a lot of Savages have already been doing. I expect we're going to see a lot of what Shane and Clint have used at their table to do traps, like Chris was just saying, like to do magic gear. I think that's what I expect that book to be. And where I'm really honestly going to hate it is I expect it to be a lot more turn the power level up on things with bigger numbers to make things special. And I hate that we're seeing that creep into Savage Worlds, because it's so easy to sit back and go, because there's nothing in Savage Worlds that says a D4 is your first day at the job, and a D12 means you're the high guru sitting up on the mountain. We've said it. Savage Worlds doesn't. So it would be just as easy to say that a D12 is cosmic phenomenal power. Well, a D4 is average human power. You could very easily set that sliding scale any way you want and use the core mechanics exactly as they are without needing to add plus 12s and plus 26s, or add 6 extra dice worth of damage to overcome 37 toughness. You don't need those extra numbers to make Savage Worlds fun, but that's what I expect we're going to see, is stuff that adds a lot more numbers and adds a lot more defined, already statted out powers and gear and traps for people to use.
I also expect it to very much mirror 5th edition D&D, what's currently out there. I really expect it to be presented as a transitional product from D20 to Savage Worlds through the fantasy lens.
Maybe.
I don't know if I like that idea.
I don't.
Companions, but
I don't like that idea. I like the idea of Savage Worlds being Savage Worlds. Like, if you're a D20 fan, you have every right in the world and all the opportunities to play a D20 game.
I wouldn't be surprised to see some form of Vancian magic creep into into it, is what I'm saying.
Literally just spend the PowerPoints first.
Yeah. It's not complicated enough, Dustin.
I don't like complicated. Complicated hurts my brain.
I would expect no less than 3 new arcane backgrounds to be presented.
Yeah.
In the book. I would expect no less than an entire chapter dedicated to traps, an entire chapter dedicated to magic items. I would expect no less than a chapter dedicated to how to use quick encounters and mass battle to do a siege. Why? Because we already know the framework was there in the first book. They're going to use that same framework, but then they're going to look at what they've done in the other companions and run from there. And that's what I expect to see happen. I just cannot wrap my head around the idea of them breaking stride with what we've seen them do with Superpowers 2.0 and the Sci-Fi Companion at this point. Like, that is
their companion
formula. I can't see them suddenly deciding halfway through, after Suede's been launched and they've already said that a Sci-Fi 2.0 really doesn't need to come out. They'll do it, but it's not necessary because they kind of built Suede on the same mentality they had for 2.0 and Sci-Fi. I just don't expect them to suddenly change midstream and go a different direction with the Fantasy Companion.
I feel like one of the things that has always bothered me in a game is when we have something that is simple and fun. Because one of the rules I live by is advance is doing the basics well. And it seems like everybody wants to add another layer. Let's add another layer. Let's add another layer. Do you know what in nature is full of layers? Onions and roses. And everybody wants to be roses, but we always end up with onions. Because that's the deal, man. Like, we keep adding layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And Savage World's greatest strength is it has mechanics that can be used for multiple things. Like, we don't have to invent a new thing to do it because there's something that we already use. And I'm so worried because I have friends, they play Mathfinder, and they get into like those extra planar time travel dimension hacks where they're literally, the plan is to go back in time 20 years and raise an army of beastmen, and it's 2.5 hours of the math revolving around how to travel through time and create a bear person army. And I don't want that in Savage Worlds. It's insane.
There you go.
And with that, you took the breath away from Savage Daddy.
Yeah. Whew. Good rant.
Thank you.
That was a good rant. All right. Well, with that, then we will go ahead and also throw out here too that also we are accepting topic suggestions. So we want to be making sure that we're producing shows and having discussions that the viewership actually wants to hear. So feel free to email. Go ahead, Dave. You got this look on your face. What?
I was going to say, I would say people should probably expect within the next month a semi-major announcement.
Okay.
Just
Great.
want to tease that.
Granted.
I think something's definitely coming that people who have been fans of the show for a while are going to be interested in.
Okay. That said, feel free to email your show topic suggestions to savagedaddy@gmail.com with the subject line show topic. And we will consider them and bring them onto the show. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy gunning for Chris, David, and Dustin saying keep rolling and stay savage.